All right, Michael, let's continue our series with the blue chip and red chips, each position. We've been breaking it down all throughout the league. And this week, we're going to highlight the running backs. And as we always do, before we start the discussion, we set the criteria. So in your opinion, Michael, what separates a blue and red chip running back from the rest of the ball carriers we see across the league?
Well, I think to get paid in the National Football League as a running back, you can't be a running back. You have to be a weapon. And so let's go back to what we're looking for, right? So when I first started in the league, it was run, block, catch. In the West Coast, it might have been run, catch, block. But today's game is about catch, block, run. Run's the last thing. If you're just a good running back that can't catch the ball or block in pass protection, you got no chance to play in the NFL. You really don't. Unless you're this elite player like Derrick Henry. Unless you're just going to run over people. Because I can promise you this, if you can't protect the quarterbacks, like Saquon Barkley, one of the liabilities with Barkley is he has a hard time in pass protection. So when he's in the game, the defense now can narrow down the offensive game plan, right? That's all defensive coordinators want to do. They want to narrow down what is the offense going to run based on personnel in the game. And if Barkley's in the game in 11 personnel, okay, I'm not that worried about them really throwing it, because if we blitz them and he's got to be in as 5-man protection and he's got to block a big guy, we'll run him over. Unless he's improved on that. I haven't seen him yet do that. But before all these injuries, he wasn't very good. So if you can't block, you can't play in passing game. And I want to hear this shit about you're a first down back. There's no such thing as a first down back. Like, that shit's over with. That's so 2000. There's no such thing as a first down back. Like, first down, we throw the ball in first down more than anybody. Right? You're going to throw the ball. And if you can't catch it when you're in the game and you're in there on first, they're just going to play you differently. So it comes really down to catch, block, run. And so when I try to go through this, the guys that I put in the red chip category, to me, were weapons. And when I say weapons, they can extend from the formation, they can run routes as a receiver, or they can come back in. And I think the red chips can do some of that too. As we talk about these red chips, like, I think Aaron Jones is fabulous. It's one of the biggest. It saddens me so much when I see Aaron Jones. I was doing pods, I think, at the Ringer, and after the draft, like I said, my favorite player in the draft was Aaron Jones, the running back from UTEP. Like, we did this, kid, Femi. This is one of the things that drive you crazy, right? Belichick and I start after the 15 draft or something. We started doing conferences like we always would do, and I was in the Southwest Conference. We were doing Texas, and they were playing UTEP. I think it was one of those. And this running back at UTEP was like, holy shit, and he outran the whole Texas team. And I'm like, who is this guy? Oh, it's Aaron Jones. He's only a sophomore, right? So once you see that, you put him on the list. Okay, you got to watch this guy. Then he tears his knee out. And then all of a sudden, but you knew he was really good. And then he goes to the combine the next year and he doesn't run as fast. But like every time I watch Aaron Jones play, I'm like, he should have been on the team I was on. Like that guy was too good, And Mixon came. We know Mixon's issues off the field. Mike Brown took a chance on him, but Mixon should never be off the field. This whole idea to put Perrine out there is fucking ridiculous. Like, it's just stupid. Mixon can catch. He can block. He's a weapon. Like, every time you substitute Mixon for somebody else, you made your team worse. Like, let's go back to Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll, what he did at Princeton was he wanted to have all the basketball players. Everybody in basketball was trending to this, was trending to having specificity at a position. Power forward does this. Small forward does that. Guard does, point guard, off guard, center, right? What Petey wanted to do was he wanted to play everybody was the same. That you all had to run, you all had to shoot well, you all had to defend and rebound. Like, everybody was the same player, right? And so when you get somebody who's all the same players, you don't have to substitute.
Yeah.
Well, that's what Mixon is. Mixon is so freaking good. Like, why would you take him off the field? Eckler, on the other hand, to me, Eckler, the reason you want to substitute a little bit with him is you don't want to wear his ass out. Right? You don't want to wear him out.
A little bowling ball.
Yeah, and I thought Javonte Williams, to me, he's another guy. Like, I know Melvin Gordon just said the other day they really want to play Williams. Hell yeah, I want to play Williams. I mean, that's a hell of a draft pick in the second round. And then I think Swift from Detroit is really going to be a good player. I really do. I think he's so talented. He's not a nickel player. He's a full-time player.
So, yeah, let's run down that list. So it's Aaron Jones of the Packers, Joe Mixon of the Bengals, Austin Eckler of the Chargers, Javonte Williams of the Broncos, and DeAndre Swift of the Detroit Lions. Those are the red chip running backs in the league. And you started with your guy, Aaron Jones, which interestingly enough, he had more receiving touchdowns last year than rushing touchdowns, which goes in line with what you're saying, that the position now is catch, block, run versus back in the day when it was run, block, catch.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, if you can't do something in the passing game, and I'm not talking about catch a fucking screen, right? Like big deal, you catch a screen. I'm talking about running angle routes. I'm talking about running flats, running seams, going outside the X, lining up outside the X. So when you see the back go outside the formation, and then he comes back in, basically what the quarterback's doing is gathering information. Because if he sees the linebacker run out there with him, he thinks it's going to be man. There's a probability. Now, there's some defenses that are smart that kind of try to confuse that, and they brings them back in. And then you've got to be able to run routes where when you run the route, you're not going to get covered. If you're running an option route, you run H option, and you come out of the backfield with a free release, and you can go right or left, that's a hard route for a guy to cover, a linebacker to cover. And then when you catch it, you can accelerate with it like Jones does. It's a huge weapon. And to me, that's what I'm looking for. That changes the game. That makes the game, because I don't think people truly understand this, at least from the way I do, is the running back makes the spread. The running back makes the spread, not the receiver. The running back makes the spread, because you've got to defend him in the box. When we had Charlie Garner in Oakland, that made our offense so much better in 2002. That's why Rich Gannon became the MVP. We were very average at receiver. Tim Brown was at the later years of his career. Jerry Rice was at the end of his career. And Jerry Porter was just kind of coming along. But it was Gardner that put the fear in God in you. It's the same thing with Marshall Faulk. Marshall Faulk was the fear of God when it was the Rams. Now, look, they had Torrey Holt and they had all those great receivers. But you were scared to death of Marshall Faulk.
Yeah, Marshall Faulk or Brian Westbrook out of the backfield when he was with Philadelphia. That's a guy that was so good and kind of before his time with how he was used there by Andy Reid in that offense. I want to ask you, though, about the two guys here who are younger. Javonte Williams, 22 years old. DeAndre Swift is 23. Williams entering his second year in the league. And he had 903 rushing yards last year, 4 touchdowns, splitting carries with Melvin Gordon. You mentioned it, how Gordon said they want to make him the guy. Can Javonte Williams be the guy? Does he have the body armor to take on a full load as a running back?
I saw I watched it was painful, and I apologize to you to say this, but it was painful to watch the Dallas-Denver game. I mean, in the preseason.
Yeah, it was.
But I watched that on tape, and Denver is going to be the West Coast offense. It is going to be true, pure West Coast offense. Nathaniel Hackett, the son of Paul Hackett, who was born into the West Coast offense with Bill Walsh. When I was at San Francisco, we were there together. And so this kid's going to really accelerate in this offense. He could be Roger Craig in the offense. Wow. Remember when the Niners were going back, Roger Craig played fullback originally. Wendell Tyler played halfback. Then they moved Craig to tailback. But when you get a back that can do both, like the fullback position back in the early 80s was still existent. There were still fullbacks. Mm-hmm. But today we just have 8. That's a dinosaur. I mean, Dominic's looking for them in his books, right? Dominic's skimming through those dinosaur books looking for a fullback, So
show him Moose Johnston.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, who is this guy? Peaky, he calls me Peaky. Peaky, who is this guy? I mean, he played fullback, Dominic, at one time. We used to have this thing called a fullback, right? But actually, fullbacks were drafted first picks overall in the draft. Tucker Fredrickson, those guys. It's hilarious when you go back and study these drafts. Wellington Mara had a great quote, and not to make fun of Wellington Mara at all, but he said, we had to take the best fullback in the draft in the first pick. That's the way the game was. That's the way the game was. And so I think ultimately, what Williams in that Denver offense, I think he's going to really excel. And I think Swift is going to excel too, because Swift is multidimensional. Swift is one of those players that can do everything. He could have played at Princeton. He could do all the things he needs to do.
We were talking about Hard Knocks earlier on here in this episode, and one of the highlights of Hard Knocks for me was Deuce Staley talking to DeAndre Swift saying, hey, you can be the best running back in the league if you want to do. You just got to go out and take it and do it. But then I look at some of his numbers and I say, wow, like this is a guy who's had trouble staying healthy. And this dates all the way back to Georgia as well. Can he be on the field enough to get up into that blue chip echelon?
I think that's the problem. And I put him in there and you say, well, where's McCaffrey? Well, McCaffrey's played 10 games in the last 2 years. Where's Barkley? Barkley, as I talked about, like who am I missing in the running back category that should be in here? There's some really good backs that have been hurt, but I think that Swift has to prove that. I put Swift in this category because of his talent. Now, if he doesn't stay healthy this year, he won't be a red chip next year. There's no doubt. But he has red chip talent. There is no doubt about that. I mean, like Stevenson from New England. And Belichick's talking about him really improving in the passing game. If Stevenson improves in the passing game with his skill as a runner, he can be a red chip player too. Mm-hmm. There's so many good backs. Like to take one that early. Look, now, I didn't put Najee Harris in here. The guy led the league in receptions and catches in terms of total touches last year behind a shitty line. He could easily be a red chip because, again, he's multidimensional. He can be a weapon as well.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned taking a running back early. That's what I wanted to ask you about. Because if you were a GM in today's NFL, would you ever draft a running back in the first round?
No, I mean, look, to me, the first round, especially in the top 5, 10 picks, you got to pick what you can't buy. You can't buy offensive linemen. You can't buy pass rushers. You can't buy defensive linemen. So you're going to have to do that. If you can't do that, now sometimes you get stuck. Look, I mean, Devin White. I mean, look, the Raiders go ahead and pick Cleveland Farrell, the 5th pick in the draft. I mean, that's ridiculous. They should have picked the linebacker. At some point, if you could pick a linebacker that you can't formation off the field, then he should be a top 10 pick. But you got to make sure you're right on that. You got to make sure you're right on that. And you got to make sure that if you take a rusher, like we screwed up in Cleveland, Mingo couldn't power. And so because he couldn't power, you end up not having a rusher. To me, those are the things you got to be careful of. And when you make mistakes, you've got to understand. People say you can't take a guard in the top 10. Well, if the guy's a legitimate great guard, Cooper wasn't a great guard. Chance Warmack wasn't a great guard. You can't take those.
Yeah.
But you certainly can take Quentin Nelson.
That's for sure. Yeah, Quentin Nelson has revitalized that Colts offense there, allowing them to run the football at a high clip. And to your point, we've seen 13 running backs drafted in the first round since 2012, and none this past year in 2022 after seeing 2 go in 2021 with Najee Harris and Travis Etienne. So it's an interesting position that it's the value of it clearly is not as valuable as some other positions across the league. And we see that in the production. I mean, Michael, this past year, 7 running backs with 1,000 yards plus last season. 10 years ago, that number was 16. 20 years ago, that number was 17. So we're seeing the splitting of the carries now becoming more in vogue versus giving it to the bell cow running back of, all right, Emmitt Smith, here goes 350 to 400 carries and go do what you do.
I mean, like Tony Pollard, I almost put him on this list. I mean, I could have easily put Tony Pollard instead of Swift. I think Tony Pollard's great. When I was writing my book, when I was watching Gale Sayers, and then I watched Tony Pollard. I don't know how the hell it happened in the same day, but people say you're crazy. No, they run the same way. Gale Sayers was more of a slasher than he was Barry Sanders. Mm-hmm. He had such ability to get on an edge and go, and that's what Pollard does. Now they're going to use Pollard a little bit in the slot. I think Pollard's Gibson at Washington. I mean, he could be on this, whether he could be a full-time runner. But again, you see the trend here. These guys are receivers that have become runners. That's what we're looking for. I think that's where – look at this list, Fem. None of these guys were picked in the first round. Mm-hmm. Mixon had character issues off the field. Eckler's a free agent. Williams is a 2. Jones is a 5. Swift is a 2.
Thanks for watching the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi. And for more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to VSiN Live and the GM Shuffle podcast with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN, wherever you get your podcasts.